Good evening, my friends. I hope this message finds you in a moment of stillness. Perhaps the day's work is done. Perhaps the evening news has just ended, leaving you with more questions than answers. Wherever you are tonight, I want you to settle in. Because we're about to talk about a man the world doesn't quite know what to do with. A man who became the youngest head of state on earth at 34 years old. A man whose face now appears on murals from Ouagadougou to Nairobi to Harlem. A man who some call a savior and others call a dictator. A man who stood before cameras and said words that made empires tremble. Tonight, we talk about Captain Ibrahim Traoré. And tonight, we ask the question everyone's asking: who is he, really? Picture a small town in western Burkina Faso, a place called Bondo Kui, the kind of place where the roads turn to red dust in the dry season and the air carries the smell of wood smoke and grilled corn. The year is 1988, March 14th. On that day, a boy was born. Not into wealth, not into power, just into the ordinary rhythms of West African life, where every generation carries the weight of the one before. His name was Ibrahim Traoré, and nobody, not even his mother, could have known what that name would come to mean. The boy grew up like so many others in his country. He went to school in Bobo Dioulasso, Burkina Faso's second largest city. He was smart, sharp. The kind of student who absorbed knowledge like the parched earth absorbs rain. By the time he finished secondary school, he'd decided on a path: geology, the study of the earth, of minerals, of what lies beneath the surface. He enrolled at the University of Ouagadougou. Picture him there in 2009, a young man in his early 20s, studying rocks and soil and the hidden wealth of his continent. And maybe, as he studied what lay beneath Burkina Faso's ground, he started to understand something else: that beneath his country's poverty lay untapped riches. That beneath the surface of independence lay the residue of colonialism. That beneath the official story, there was always another truth. He graduated with a degree in geology. But the earth wasn't calling him to research. Something else was. Something louder. Something more urgent. In 2010, at the age of 22, Ibrahim Traoré joined the army. He went to the Georgia's Namoano Military Academy in Po for his officer training. By 2012, he'd graduated as a second lieutenant, young, disciplined, ready to serve his country. But the country he was serving was not at peace. By 2014, now a lieutenant, Traoré was deployed to Mali as part of a United Nations peacekeeping mission. Mali, where jihadist groups were tearing through villages, where children were being recruited by armed militants, where the international community had promised protection but delivered chaos. Traoré saw things there, things that stay with a soldier, things that change what you believe about who the good guys really are. When he returned to Burkina Faso, he joined a special counter-terrorism unit in the north, the front lines, the places where young men go to fight and too many don't come back. By 2020, he'd been promoted to captain. He was leading an artillery regiment, and he was watching his country bleed. Because Burkina Faso, in those years, was drowning, jihadist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State had taken over vast territories. They weren't just attacking military posts. They were burning schools, massacring villagers, turning entire regions into no-go zones. And the government, led by President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore, seemed unable or unwilling to stop it. Soldiers on the front lines were dying not because they lacked courage, but because they lacked supplies, ammunition, food, support. They were being sent into battle like sacrificial offerings, while politicians in the capital lived in comfort. Traoré, like so many of his fellow soldiers, grew disillusioned, angry. And when anger meets opportunity, revolutions are born. In January 2022, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba led a coup that overthrew President Kabore. The military seized power. They promised to fix the security crisis. They promised to restore dignity to the armed forces. And Traoré, believing in that promise, supported the coup. He backed Damiba. He was given command of an artillery regiment in the north-central region, stationed in Kaya. But by September of that same year, it became clear that Damiba had become what he'd replaced. The violence continued. Soldiers were still dying. The jihadists were still advancing. And in a devastating ambush, 11 soldiers and dozens of civilians were killed. The outrage was immediate. The military rank and file had had enough. And this time, it was Captain Ibrahim Traoré who led the charge. On September 30th, 2022, Traoré and a group of junior officers staged a coup. They ousted Damiba. They seized control. And on October 6th, at the age of 34, Ibrahim Traoré was sworn in as interim president of Burkina Faso, the youngest head of state in the world. Younger than Thomas Sankara had been when he took power in 1983. Younger than anyone could remember. But age is just a number. What mattered was what he said next. From the very beginning, Traoré positioned himself as something different, not just another military strongman, not just another African leader making promises he wouldn't keep. He invoked the spirit of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary president who had ruled Burkina Faso from 1983 to 1987. The man who'd renamed the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, meaning land of upright people. The man who'd stood up to France and the IMF and was assassinated for it. Traoré began wearing the same kind of simple military uniform Sankara had worn. He quoted Sankara's speeches. He used Sankara's imagery. And young people across Africa started paying attention. Because here was a leader who wasn't wearing expensive suits, who wasn't flying to Paris for photo ops, who spoke about sovereignty and dignity and refusing to bow. In his inaugural address, Traoré declared that Burkina Faso was in a state of emergency. Security, defense, healthcare, infrastructure, everything was in crisis. And he pledged to fight the terrorist groups while honoring the transition timeline agreed upon with ECOWAS, the regional bloc, which called for a return to civilian rule by July 2024. But that promise, like so many made in moments of crisis, would not hold. Because Traoré had a different vision. And implementing that vision would require time, control, and a willingness to break with everyone who expected him to follow the old playbook. Let's talk about what he's actually done. Not the propaganda, not the hype, not the AI-generated videos that went viral, the actual policies. First, he went after the money. In many African countries, when a new leader comes to power, the first thing they do is increase their own salary and that of their friends. Traoré did the opposite. He cut ministers' and parliamentarians' salaries by 30%, and he kept his own salary at the level of a military captain. Let that sink in. The president of a nation earning what a mid-level military officer earns. He increased civil servants' wages by 50%, the teachers, the nurses, the people who keep the country running. He cleared domestic debts, not all of them, and not perfectly, but he made moves that signaled something was different. Then, he went after resources. Burkina Faso is rich in gold. Some of the largest gold reserves in West Africa sit beneath its soil. For decades, foreign companies, mostly European, had been mining that gold and shipping it out of the country unrefined. Burkina Faso got a fraction of the profits, while Europe got the wealth. Traoré nationalized 2 gold mines. He banned the export of unrefined gold. And he opened a national gold refinery designed to process 150 tons annually. He told the world, "Our gold will be refined here. Our wealth will stay here." He distributed over 400 tractors to farmers, 239 tillers, equipment that could help Burkina Faso feed itself. And the results showed yields in tomatoes, millet, and rice increased significantly. He opened a new airport. He launched infrastructure projects. He established a state-owned bank to reduce dependence on foreign financial institutions. And then, he did what every Pan-Africanist has dreamed of, and few have dared. He told France to leave. In 2023, French troops were expelled from Burkina Faso, the same troops that had been stationed there under agreements signed decades ago. The same troops that were supposed to be protecting the region from terrorism, but somehow, the terrorism only got worse while they were there. Traoré didn't just kick out the French military, he kicked out French media. France 24 was banned after airing an interview with an Al-Qaeda leader. Radio France Internationale was blocked. He wasn't interested in their narratives anymore. And he didn't stop there. He joined with Mali and Niger, two other countries that had also experienced military coups and also expelled French forces, to form the Alliance of Sahel States. 3 nations, 3 military governments, 3 countries saying, "We will defend ourselves." The West called it a dictatorship. They called it a threat to regional stability. ECOWAS, the regional bloc heavily influenced by France, condemned the alliance. But Traoré and his allies withdrew from ECOWAS. They said, if this organization serves France more than it serves us, we don't need it. And then he turned to Russia, and China, and Turkey, new partners, new alliances. He reopened Russia's embassy in Ouagadougou. He traveled to Moscow in May 2025 to attend Victory Day celebrations, meeting with Vladimir Putin. The symbolism was unmistakable. Burkina Faso was no longer in the Western orbit. But let's not paint this as a fairy tale, because it's not. While Traoré has been making these bold moves, the security situation in Burkina Faso has not improved. It's gotten worse. More than 60% of the country is now outside government control. Over 2 million people have been displaced from their homes. Jihadist attacks have increased in frequency and brutality. And Traoré's response has been controversial. He declared a general mobilization in April 2023, calling on citizens to join the fight. He expanded the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, a civilian militia, recruiting tens of thousands. But there are credible reports that some of these volunteers were forcibly conscripted, that critics, journalists, and activists have been detained and sent to the front lines against their will. That dissent has been crushed, not with argument, but with military power. Journalists who criticize the government have been arrested. Some have been conscripted into the military as punishment. In June 2024, 4 prominent journalists were detained. In March 2025, 3 more. Judges, lawyers, activists. Anyone perceived as a threat has faced consequences. The promise to restore civilian rule by July 2024 was abandoned. Elections have been postponed. Now the plan is to hold them in 2029, 7 years after the coup, and maybe not even then. Human rights organizations have accused both the jihadist groups and the Burkinabe military of committing atrocities. Civilians caught in the middle, villages destroyed, arbitrary detentions, extrajudicial killings. This is the other side of the Ibrahim Traoré story, the side that doesn't make it into the viral videos, the side that his supporters dismiss as Western propaganda, the side his critics say proves he's just another strongman wrapped in revolutionary rhetoric. So who is he, really? Is he a visionary Pan-Africanist reclaiming sovereignty for his people? Or is he an authoritarian using nationalism to consolidate power? Is he the heir to Thomas Sankara's revolutionary legacy, or is he a military leader who seized power and refuses to let go? The truth, my friends, is that he might be both. Because history is never simple, heroes are never perfect, and revolutions always cost more than anyone wants to admit. What we know is this: Ibrahim Traoré represents something powerful in the African imagination right now. He represents defiance. He represents the idea that a young African leader can stand up to the West and survive. He represents the possibility that sovereignty isn't just a word in a constitution, but something you can actually fight for and win. When he appeared at the inauguration of Ghana's President Mahama in January 2025, he received the loudest applause of any African head of state present. Not the elected presidents, not the elder statesmen, the military captain from Burkina Faso. Young people across the continent see themselves in him. They see someone who refuses to apologize for being African, who refuses to beg for aid, who refuses to let France dictate policy from Paris. And older generations who remember Sankara, who remember Lumumba, who remember what it felt like to believe that Africa could truly be free, they see him as a second chance, a redemption story, the revolution that didn't die in 1987. But belief is not the same as reality. Hope is not the same as governance. And symbols, no matter how powerful, cannot feed a displaced population or stop bullets. The question is whether Traoré can translate his defiance into development, whether he can turn his anti-colonial rhetoric into actual institutions that serve the people, whether he can fight terrorism without becoming a terror himself. Right now, Burkina Faso's GDP has grown. Infrastructure has expanded. Farmers have equipment they didn't have before. The country has more control over its resources than it did 3 years ago. But the roads are still dangerous. The jihadists still control territory. Millions are still displaced. And dissent is still being silenced. So when the West calls him a dictator, they're not entirely wrong. When his supporters call him a hero, they're not entirely wrong either. Because Ibrahim Traoré is not a character in a movie. He's a real man, making real decisions with real consequences. And like all leaders who challenge empires, he will be judged not by his intentions, but by his outcomes. And the outcomes are still being written. What does his story mean for us? For those of us watching from afar, trying to make sense of a continent that's changing faster than the headlines can keep up, it means we have to resist the easy narratives, the good guy, bad guy stories that make us feel smart but leave us ignorant. It means we have to ask, why did someone like Traoré become necessary? What failures of democracy, what decades of exploitation, what broken promises led to a moment where a 34-year-old soldier could seize power and be celebrated for it? It means we have to acknowledge that when the West talks about democracy in Africa, they often mean compliance. And when Africa talks about sovereignty, they often mean freedom from that compliance. It means we have to hold two truths at once, that challenging Western imperialism is necessary, and that African leaders must also be held accountable by African people. Because the real revolution isn't just kicking out foreign troops, it's building systems that work. It's creating economies that serve the people. It's ensuring that power doesn't just change hands, but changes form. Traoré is 36 years old now. If he stays in power until 2029 as planned, he'll be 41. Still young, still learning, still making choices that will define not just his legacy, but his country's future. The question is whether he will use that time to build something that lasts, or whether he will become what he once overthrew. So tonight, as you think about Ibrahim Traoré, I ask you to do what the media won't. Hold space for complexity. Celebrate the defiance without ignoring the consequences. Support the vision without excusing the violations. Because somewhere in Burkina Faso tonight, a young president is making decisions. And somewhere else, a displaced family is trying to survive. And somewhere beyond that, the world is watching to see if this experiment in African sovereignty will succeed or collapse under its own contradictions. We don't know the ending yet, but we're watching it unfold. And maybe that's the most honest thing we can say. Until we meet again, may peace find your home, may wisdom guide your questions, and may you never forget that every hero's story is also a human story, with all the flaws and hopes and failures that come with being human. Good night, my friends. Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not a myth. He's a man. And the revolution he's trying to lead is still being written in the red dust of Burkina Faso. History will judge. But tonight, we simply witness.